do want to thank Peggy Fitzgerald and John Davis for conceiving and maintaining this wonderful, wonderful conference. And I want to thank all the people who have volunteered to work here and all of you who have taken the time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this, what I think is a really extraordinary movement of the human condition. I really do. Now, I was here I think it was 2010, about 3 years ago, and my life has changed quite a bit over those 3 years, and I want to share with you some of what's been going on and some of my most recent work. It's still, right off the front burner. About 6 months after I was here, I had an opportunity to do the wedding of my oldest son. I was a former Presbyterian pastor. Spent 15 years of my career in the Presbyterian church, main line, straight down the road, middle of the road Presbyterian church, the frozen chosen, where everything done decently and in order. And I came to a place where I realized that I didn't fit anymore. Because I wasn't decently and in order about anything. I was always going off to these strange places like something like the Coptic conference, and I couldn't talk to my parishioners about it. I was exploring all kinds of books that I couldn't tell anybody about. And my life was taking me in different directions. And so I left the ministry in the year 2000. Now, one thing about being a pastor, though, as far as your family is concerned, if there's ever a wedding or a funeral, you're still a pastor. It doesn't matter how many years have intervened, right? And, it didn't help, but for some reason, they seem to like my weddings and my funerals. I can't tell you the number of times after doing a funeral where I'd have an old lady at the back, and I'd be greeting her, and she'd say, "Oh, that was just wonderful. I want so much for you to do my funeral." I said, "Just give me a date. That's all I need. So I can get it on the calendar and then everything will be set." But they never did. People die at the most inconsiderate times. I don't understand. So anyway, when my oldest son, asked me to do this service, his wedding service, I said, "Well, of course." Secretly, I was kind of grousing about it because I'm thinking, can't I just be an ordinary dad? Can't I just sit out there in the congregation and enjoy it? But then I got done with the sermon, writing the sermon, and I go, "Oh, that's why I have to do this, because nobody can do it better than me, because I know my son better than anybody else." Well, here I am on the day of the wedding service, and I'm right up in front of the whole congregation. To my left is my son who's going to get married. To his left is his brother, who's the best man, and then a couple of groomsmen. And to my right, the maid of honor and the bridesmaids. And I'm standing up there, and it suddenly occurs to me, I wonder how I'm going to do emotionally with this. It's going to be interesting. So I'm standing up there, and I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm doing all right. I've kind of got it all together. I'm holding it together. And then the bride comes in. I want to tell you, radiance is too small a word to describe what she looked like. She was walking on air. She was gorgeous beyond belief. And I'm thinking, oh, boy. And I look to my left, and here's my son, the groom. And I look, and you see his chin starting going like this. And his eyes are all red. And I go, oh, no. Tears streaming down his cheeks. Everybody in the whole wedding party is crying. Next thing I know, both the bride and groom are standing in front of me, and I'm in tears. My nose is running. And nobody thought to bring a Kleenex, right? And I'm really in trouble at this point. But then my middle son, the best man, always on top of things. I watch him as he breaks rank. He goes down to the front pew where his mother is sitting, grabs a Kleenex from her, and comes back, and he starts dabbing his eyes. I grab the Kleenex from him. I'm wiping my eyes and my nose. The groom grabs it from me, from the groom to the bride, over to the maid of honor, and on down the bridesmaid line. That thing was sopping wet. If I could have gotten it, I would have framed it. Well, I think part of the reason why we were in such tears was because this wasn't just a wedding. You see, about 3 years before that, my son was terribly, terribly ill. We didn't know if he was going to survive. He had some kind of disease, and we didn't know what it is. We really never did find out, but he couldn't eat. He couldn't keep anything down. Hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month, he was throwing up almost continuously, and we watched him as he was wasting away pound after pound after pound. You know, it's a devastating thing when you're a parent. You know, they always say that there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. I think it's true of a parent who's losing a child or potentially losing a child. There's a God, and you're going to bargain with that God no matter what it takes. And I was arguing with God. I said, take me, make me sick. I don't care what it is. Just give me my son's life back. We took him from one doctor to another, from one hospital to another, from one clinic to another. Nobody could help him out. And there he was, wasting away. He got down to a full-grown man, down to about 120 pounds. We finally took him to a hospital in Los Angeles, Mount Sinai Hospital. He was there for a period of time. They weren't able to help him, and so they pushed him out of the hospital, and it was our last hope. And then, for some reason, the same day he left the hospital, he took a bite of food. And then another bite, and another bite. And as the weeks went on, he gained more and more weight to the point where here he was now, 3 years later, standing in front of me, 180 pounds, bawling like a baby, along with his new bride, waiting to get started into a brand new life. And as I was watching that Kleenex going down the line, I began to realize this is much more than a wedding. No, sir. This is a resurrection. I noticed something else. I noticed that my heart was expanding further and further forward. It almost felt like it was going to burst, trying so much to contain this uncontainable emotion. And I took notice. It was a way I had experienced the heart as never before. And I began to think, you know, there's something about this. What is it about the heart that seems to come into play whenever we're talking about the most important things in life? If we're going to have a really important conversation with somebody, we talk about having a heart-to-heart with them, don't we? Yeah. If we want to talk to a congregation or an audience, we say, speak from the heart. When we talk about what somebody wants to do to follow their passion in life, we say, follow your heart. And yet we live in a very brain-centric society, don't we? We are preoccupied with the brain. We love the brain. We are convinced that everything is happening in the brain. Well, I began to wonder, maybe that's not so much the case. I wonder if there isn't some way in which we've got things sort of upside down and backwards. So I began to wonder about this whole question of the heart and what it might mean. It wasn't too long after that I began to think about another question. And I didn't think it was related, but it turns out that it was very much related. I've worked in a number of organizations throughout my professional career. And I worked with some really amazing and wonderful people. Worked with some really amazing and wonderful organizations that were doing incredible work in the world with incredible missions. But for some reason, I've noticed that every time I've been a part of an organization, inevitably, ego starts to kind of come in and work its little magic. You know, what is it about the ego? It isn't long before people are going through territorial wars and they're trying to gain control because they're very sure that they're right and everybody else is wrong. There are these personal vendettas that can start to crop up, even with the best of people. So I was sort of meditating on this one day, and I didn't get the answer to the question. All I got was a direction to go into my heart. I don't know what that means. I did it. So the way I did it was every night before I went to bed, while I'm laying in bed waiting for sleep to come on, I would simply get very relaxed and I would go to the place of my heart. Now, I'm not talking about the heart as the pump. I'm talking about the heart as sort of this energy center. Some people call it the chakra. I don't know, I think it may be more than that. Some people call it the tiny space of the heart. Some people call it the sacred space of the heart. I didn't know any of that. I just went to a place that's somewhere around in here. It sort of hung out there. So I'm hanging out there while I'm falling asleep. And one of the things I noticed was very surprising to me when I started to do this. I've never been a terribly good meditator. I've always struggled with that for some reason. My mind just keeps going 90 miles an hour, looping around the same old record, playing it over and over and over again. But one of the things I noticed was that when I dropped into my heart, for some reason, all of that began to settle out. There's a quiet place there. There's a centered place there, and it was really quite remarkable to me. The second thing I noticed was that my dream world began to open up in whole new ways, living technicolor. I mean, it was incredible. Began to discover whole new worlds. And I began to think, maybe there's something here that's really important. And I began to play around with this idea of, I wonder if there's some kind of alchemical property of the heart. The old alchemists in the popular imagination, they were the guys who were always trying to turn lead into gold. But really, when you looked at it from an esoteric perspective, they were actually working with the soul. They were trying to find ways of taking the base elements of the soul and transforming it into something that was truly remarkable and precious. That was the work of the alchemist. So I began to think, does the heart have some kind of alchemical properties? I thought, well, let's see what happens. So I was kind of playing around with this metaphor, and not too long after that, I had the opportunity to have lunch with a really quite remarkable man. Has anybody here ever heard of Drunvalo Melchizedek? Oh yeah, okay. For those of you who don't know, he's best known for his work in sacred geometry. And when I had lunch with him, I was thinking we were going to talk about sacred geometry and Fibonacci numbers and all those kinds of things, because it might have had some relevance to the work I was doing at that time. But to my surprise, Drunvalo began talking about his work with the heart. And I go, ooh, isn't that interesting? He's changed his whole entry into what he's doing to start first with the heart and then move from that process on outward. So he got my attention right away. He said a couple of things to me that really kind of stuck with me. He said, first of all, he said, in ancient Egypt, whenever they would prepare a mummy, they would take the organs of the body out of the body and they would put them in these sealed jars that they would put in the tomb with the body, except for two organs that they would put back in. You know what those were? The heart and... No, the heart and the genitals. Because those are the two things you're going to need in the afterlife. Pretty good afterlife, don't you think? Uh-huh. Yeah. Sign me up for that. So they'd sew those back in the body. He says, you know what they did with the brain? I said, I don't have any idea. He said, they just throw it out in the trash. Well, now, isn't that interesting? As I began to think about it, I remembered my studies in seminary when we were studying Hebrew, and the words for mind in Hebrew often had to do with the heart, never had anything to do with the brain. Years ago, Casey Stengel, anybody remember Casey Stengel? He was this great manager of the New York Yankees, won all kinds of championships. Late in his career, though, he decided to take on a real challenge, and he became the manager of this fledgling New York Mets teams. And they were setting all new records for futility. It was amazing how bad they really were. Well, one day his team is out there and they're playing defense, and a ball is hit down the first baseline, right at the first baseman. All he has to do is pick it up, but it takes a bad hop over his shoulder, and the runner is safe. It's an error. Second inning, another ball is hit down the first baseline, and he boots it again. 2 innings, 2 errors. Third inning, same thing. Another ball hit down the first baseline, and he even screws that one up. 3 innings, 3 errors. And when he comes over to the dugout, Casey is just livid, and he's screaming at him 6 inches from his face, full gale of force, 90 miles an hour, full-on spit and everything. And Casey says, look, if you can't play first base, I'll find somebody who can. And by this time, the first baseman's had it. He says, hey, Casey, if you think it's so easy, you go out and play. And Casey says, give me that glove. Now, by this time, Casey Stengel was about 70 years old. Now, this is back in the time when 70 years old was old. Not like it is now as I'm approaching that age, when it's the new 30. Back then, 70 was just one step away from the grave, right? And so, wouldn't you know, Casey Stengel, a man 70 years of age, goes out playing first base in professional baseball. He hasn't done it for decades. And wouldn't you know, a ball is hit right down the first base line. It's rolling so slow, it's gathering moss. All he's got to do is pick it up with his bare hand and tag the runner as he's going by. But I don't know what it is. Maybe Casey isn't as nimble as he used to be. Can't reach down quite as low as he used to, and it went right between his legs. After the inning, he comes over to the dugout, and the first baseman comes up and he says, "See, it isn't as easy as it looks, is it, Casey?" Casey throws the glove down. He says, "Oh, you got first base so screwed up, nobody can play it anymore." I wonder if maybe we don't have it screwed up a little bit with our preoccupation with the brain and our dismissal of the heart. I wonder if there's something we're missing.